Hello and welcome to another episode of Lessons Learned, UK Sailmakers podcast, where sailors get together and talk about sailing stuff. And hopefully everybody will learn something else that'll help them sail with confidence. I'm here today with Bill Henson. I'm in New York and Bill is in Fremantle, Western Australia. It's good to have you with us. We're going to be talking tonight about Bill's adventure on his JPK 45 SIRENE, where you bought it in Lorient, France?
Yes, that's correct.
There's been a lot that's happened between now and then. But let's start, Bill, by talking about the boat itself. I have friends that have JPKs, but tell us why you chose the boat, what condition it was when you bought it, and some of the things that you might have done since you've gotten it.
I think a lot of people spend time thinking about their next boat. And of course, I'd done a fair amount of research. So what I was really looking for was, well, I suppose a couple of things. Firstly, I wanted a boat which could be dual purpose, that was capable of racing, but also was capable of cruising, just because I enjoy both activities. So I actually got this boat built from new. So the second thing I was looking for was a boat with twin rudders, because my previous boat, which was, two boats previously, were both C&Cs, and they were great boats, particularly in light airs, but with a tall rig, the C&C 34 loved a good roll and approach. So sure. I decided that twin rudders were the way to go.
Like the old IOR boats with the skinny sterns, right?
Yeah, the C&C 34 was just a classic one of those. And then I had a C&C 115, which was better, but still, when pushed hard, would just spin out. So I thought that twin rudders might help solve that problem. So that sort of narrowed the field down. Obviously, JPK got a good reputation. And the other attractive feature was that being a small yard, they were willing to do a fair amount of customization, provided they thought it made sense. So I was able to make some changes to the boat compared to the standard version.
What did you have them do?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, the standard version has a large hard dodger, and they make it very difficult to communicate between bow and stern. So we took off the hard dodger, which was an option, but they never actually built one without it. We moved some winches onto the cabin top, but probably the most significant change was to put a deeper keel on the boat with the same righting moment. So we took 400 or 450 kilos out of the weight of the keel by going 0.4 of a meter deeper on draft. So it's not a super deep keel, but it's 2.6 meters now instead of standard 2.2.
How did that impact your performance?
Well, look, in terms of, obviously saving weight, it had a bigger weight saving than all of the other little changes I made put together. So lithium batteries and carbon masts and all that sort of stuff's all good stuff, but you don't get 400 kilos from making that change. So the deeper keel made a really big difference.
It's interesting that you were looking for both a cruising boat and a racing boat. What's the cruising like in Western Australia?
Challenging. We've got a long coast with not many natural harbours and only sporadic man-made harbours, but some very remote offshore islands. And so when I say remote, like uninhabited, barely visited, in some cases in very good condition with native animals. Some others were used for sheep, but they've all been removed now, and the islands have been allowed to revert back to their natural condition. So it's an interesting coast. I'm talking about the southern parts. Then we have the Kimberley, which is just like a cruising paradise. So it's a huge area with islands and creeks, and you can go 20 miles up some of the rivers in a completely pristine environment. So, what's that, 1,000 miles to go and sail to get there.
So you've got your options. Let's start when you picked up the boat in the Mediterranean, because I know that UK Sailmakers ran a couple of articles about your initial adventures and your first race with a boat. Tell us more about that.
We picked up the boat in Lorient, which is on the Atlantic coast. So we then sailed down to the Mediterranean and called into Malta in time to do the Middle Sea race. So the original idea was that I would get my crew from Fremantle and elsewhere to come and join me, and we could do the race, and it would be a great introduction to the boat. However, COVID got in the way. So at that time, it wasn't possible to leave Australia without getting a visa to depart. And so for most of my crew, they couldn't join. So I had other sort of friends, acquaintances, and frankly, people I'd never met before came and joined me in Malta. We did the race, but to say that we were underprepared would be putting it very politely.
And the conditions of that race have a reputation of being a little sporty.
Yeah, it was certainly blowy. We saw 35 knots, maybe gusting even above that. There was a couple of rigs came down, sails blown out. So it was quite challenging conditions. Our total damage bill for the race was that we lost one winch handle. So we got through it without any dramas.
Okay, so now you did the Middle Sea race, and then you left Malta and you went to the Suez Canal.
We spent a little bit of time in Greece and then went through the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea and across the Indian Ocean.
I have some friends that have decided that they weren't going to circumnavigate the globe because it would take them through the Suez Canal, and they didn't want to play with the pirates. Did you have any issues with them?
Look, there's a Facebook group called Red Sea Passage, and I became part of that. To be honest, I wouldn't say it's 100% incident-free, but there's been no severe piracy cases, probably in the last 10 or 15 years. At that stage, there weren't actually any active wars going on around the Red Sea. Of course, there's now a civil war in Sudan, and the Houthis are shooting up ships. So it's a bit more active, but by and large, they're still not interested in yachts. They want big targets. But there would be maybe 50, 75 boats a year going through that route, almost completely without incident.
Well, that's good to know. Who were sailing with you at this point? You had your son with you, I think?
Yes, most of the passage from through to Djibouti, which is at the bottom end of the Red Sea, was just the two of us on board, apart from the Middle Sea race. But then a friend came out for the long leg. So we sailed from Djibouti to the Maldives, which starts with monsoon season that we chose to sail in. We had a 500-mile upwind leg to start. It was sort of upwind in 15 knots and clear skies, very stable airflow. And then once you can get out of the Gulf of Eden, it's called, you can then duck away a bit to the south, crack sheets, and then there's 1,000 miles of really fast sailing. The challenge was that we had Somalia on one side and Yemen on the other side. So we were trying to tack down the sort of middle of that gap, not wanting to get too close to either coast.
Understood. What kind of speeds will the JPK 45 do?
Well, look, top speed so far is 23.8 knots. I was hoping in the Sydney Hobart we could crack that. I think there's 25 knots in the boat. It's very much dependent on the waves. We're really talking about surfing on waves. The boat will just about plane in flat water, but it's difficult to get it to plane. But given a few waves, it just gets up and goes.
Gets up and goes. You know, spoiler alert there, you mentioned the Sydney Hobart race. So you got back to Fremantle. We'll get to the Sydney Hobart race in just a second. But you get back to Fremantle. The boat's all in one piece, except you've lost a winch handle. Then what did you do? Did you hang out for a while before you went around the corner?
Yeah, we did some racing off Fremantle. What was interesting was I had a get together with all my crew, which are probably 20 odd people that have sailed with me at different times, plus others. And we had a bit of a party, but before that, we had a bit of a chat. And I said, well, look, I've got a new boat. I'm retired. What sailing would you guys like to do? And so we went through, we generated a long list. Some people wanted to go cruising around Europe. And I said, forget it, I've just done that. So we then put it to the vote, and Sydney Hobart came top of the vote. So I said, fine, we'll do the Sydney Hobart. So that's how that idea came about.
And you did it in the Corinthian division?
Yes. Yeah. So it was completely West Australian crew, all from the local club, all of whom had sailed with me or I'd known for many years. A great bunch of people to sail with.
How was the race itself? I mean, the starts, you watch the starts and they're just magnificent. All the helicopter views and, all the 100-footers zooming out. And then there are the rest of us. But how did you like the race?
Oh, look, it was a great experience. I must say the start, as you said, on Sydney Harbour is spectacular. I hadn't appreciated, but basically we started in the northeasterly, so we had to beat down the harbour. You're hemmed in by spectator boats on both sides. But everybody was in the same mode. They just want to get out of the harbour without an incident. So people were being pretty generous in allowing for water and forgiving. Some boats were having some more difficulties manoeuvring, people just staying clear of them. So everybody wanted to get out of the harbour without an incident. And then after that, it ran pretty much to the forecast. So the forecast, it was going to blow pretty fresh the first night, and the weather turned out to be exactly as forecast. We discussed beforehand the sequence of sail changes we're going to do as the breeze built. Our objective was to get through the first night without busting anything and without hurting anybody. And then after that, the race looked fairly straightforward.
Bill, how was it going through the strait?
Look, no particular issues. We had a pretty fresh breeze, so we started hard on the wind, and then we looked at the forecast and the wind was due to shift and we were going to be able to ease sheets. So we decided we'd crack off a bit and really get the boat moving. And so we had a very fast crossing, bit bumpy, but nothing remarkable.
One of the things I understand is that you worked in the build out and then subsequently very closely with Geoff Bishop down in the UK in Fremantle, Western Australia. And I understand you picked up a couple of specialty sails before the Hobart race, but talk to me a little bit about the process that you went through developing your initial sail inventory and then what you've done subsequently.
Yes, look, I guess I was in discussions with UK basically from the time when I had selected the boat, and we didn't just talk about sails, we're talking about the setup on the boat and the furlers that we were going to use and the arrangement for a staysail, which we have. So really good interaction. I was also chatting with one of the local riggers as well for a couple of ideas. So UK basically helped me through the whole process, not just the sails, but basically deciding the setup on the boat, which would allow me to both race the boat and also cruise it. So one of the options which we settled on was a furling jib, which is set directly on the forestay, hanked onto the forestay. The forestay itself rotates to furl the jib. So it's from Ubi Mayor called the jiber system. And that allows you to get the benefit of hanked on sails for easy sail changes, but also to be able to furl the jib when you're in cruise mode.
The best of both worlds. Bill, did you have any interaction with the FSI program that we use at UK Sailmakers?
Yes, twice. So firstly, it was used to do some modelling on the initial setup, and particularly how and when to use the staysail. And then prior to the Sydney Hobart, we added a jib top to the inventory. And again, some more modelling was done to try to predict what the limitations of that sail were, what sailing wind angles we could fly it at, and again, how we use the staysail in conjunction with that sail.
Yeah, the jib top is one of these specialty sails that is sort of regaining its stature after decades and decades for any number of reasons. Did you ever consider winging it out?
Well, that's exactly what we did during the first night. So when it really started to blow and we had to get the spinnaker down, I think we were sort of aiming at 28 knots or something like that. We were going to take the A3 down, and we then went with the jib top poled out. Now, in Australia, we have a variation to the IRC rules, which allows you to use the spinnaker pole solely for poling out a jib without penalty. So it cannot be used with a spinnaker, but it can be used with a jib. And so the furling jib top was the ideal sail for when the wind built over 30 knots.
Bill, what types of sails did you have? Were they X-Drive? Were they titanium? And how'd they hold up for you?
Look, when we left, we obviously sailed mostly in cruise mode coming back from Lorient, and the sails were all X-Drive. In terms of longevity, X-Drive is outstanding. So the boat has now done, I think, 25,000 miles, and we're still on the original made. So that's just fantastic. It's good enough to do okay in the Sydney Hobart. It's held up extremely well. And of the 25,000 miles, nearly all sailed in the sunshine. So it's had a lot of sunlight exposure, and it's actually withstood both the sun and the sailing. So that's gone extremely well. We did also have a titanium but that life of that was not as good as the X-Drive.
Tell me about that racing jib.
Yeah, so for the racing jib, this is a batten sail, has battens down the leach, so it can't be furled. One of the benefits of going with Hanks, it's quite easy to put a reef in it. So that jib can be reefed from a number 2 to a number 3 just by dropping the sail down, and with a new tack point and a new clue, we can put a reef in the sail a lot quicker and easier than changing headsails.
I must say that people are very happy with X-Drive sails from the durability standpoint, from shape holding, and they're calling them price performing sails. And it's just a great product on the market.
Yes, look, I've known Geoff Bishop for many years, and one of the things which has been so useful to me is that in dealing with Geoff and with the rest of the UK group, not so much interested in selling sails, more interested in trying to understand what my objectives were and what I wanted to do with the boat, and then helping me find a solution which would actually deliver those objectives. So focus more on the outcomes I was trying to achieve rather than so many square meters of this particular material. So quite a different style than other sailmakers I've dealt with, and solution focused rather than product focused.
You did the Middle Sea race. You sailed 25,000 miles. You did Sydney Hobart. You're back home in the Western Australia. You can do some cruising now?
Yes, absolutely. So although we have a race from Fremantle to Indonesia, which will happen in May this year, so that is a 1,500-mile race, basically straight north to Indonesia. So we're entered for that. After that, we'll be going for a couple of months cruising around the islands of Indonesia and then bringing the boat back to Fremantle. After that, the second most popular item decided by the crew was what I would call adventure cruising. So cruising to some remote parts, some islands that you really can't get to by any other means, or some remote parts of the world. So that will be a cruising adventure around the Indian Ocean is the next big activity. But I might need a year or so break after this has been a very busy year. Because not only did we do the Sydney Hobart, we sailed the boat there and back. So that was another 2,000 miles each way to get to the start line and back from the finish line. So this year's been even too much sailing for me.
Well, Bill Henson, thanks an awful lot for sharing all your adventures with us. Good luck with your Indonesia race and your adventure cruising. And we'll stay in touch. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining another episode of UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned. You can access the full Lessons Learned library in the how-to section of uksailmakers.com. I'm Buttons Padin, and I hope these lessons learned will help you sail with confidence.